What's the dumbest way a vacation can end? Nathan Cole here with Fatal Files. And here's how it happened. From a man who rented a motorbike he'd never ridden before, to a photographer who crossed a clearly marked exclusion zone and learned too late why the area was off limits. It was September 14th, 2016, in Phuket, Thailand. I've done enough of these stories to know that some locations come up more than others, and Phuket is one of them. There's something about that place specifically, the energy of it, the way it makes people feel untouchable, that tends to show up in the background of a lot of bad decisions. This one is no different. Damon Cavello was 34, project coordinator for a logistics company out of Columbus, Ohio. Organized guy, dependable, the type who had a system for everything and actually stuck to it. His friends described him as the one who handled the details, the reservations, the itinerary, the backup plan. He'd saved up for the Phuket trip for months, planned it carefully, and arrived with 3 friends in early September 2016. The first few days went exactly the way you'd expect. Beaches, markets, good food, the usual. Nothing about those first few days would have told you anything was off. So what changed on day 4? His friends booked a boat excursion. Damon stayed behind. He'd been watching the motorbikes since they landed. They were everywhere, weaving through traffic, parked outside every guest house, ridden casually by tourists and locals like it was nothing. And at some point during those first few days, something clicked, and he decided he wanted to try one. No big dramatic moment, no dare, no pressure from anyone. Just a guy on vacation who saw something that looked fun and decided to go for it, which, I don't know, makes it harder to explain in some ways, not easier. Here's where it starts to go wrong. He found a small rental place near where they were staying. No license check, which smaller rental shops in that area were known for at the time. Paid for a full day, signed a form, got handed a 125 cubic centimeter motorbike and a gesture toward the throttle and brake. That was the entire handover. Damon had never been on a motorized 2-wheeled vehicle in his life, not once. So what did he do with zero experience, zero instruction, and a motorbike he'd never touched before? He took it out anyway. And what makes me wonder is whether the whole thing felt too easy at the start, because the first few minutes were just a quiet side road and nothing went wrong yet. He spent those few minutes nearby, going slowly, unevenly, still figuring out the basics. People in the area that morning described exactly that. A rider who looked unsteady, not in control, not ready. By any reasonable measure, he was not ready for real traffic. He pulled onto the main coastal road anyway, a 2-lane stretch connecting several busy areas on the western side of the island. Mid-morning, fully active traffic. Passenger, vehicles, scooters, trucks, tuk-tuks moving in both directions. Curves, inclines, minimal shoulder. Not a road that forgives mistakes. Here's the thing, he had been on that bike for less than 15 minutes total by the time he made that turn. Witnesses later described seeing a motorbike moving at an inconsistent speed, accelerating more than the rider looked like he could handle. Damon was about half a mile from the rental spot when he hit a gradual right-hand curve. He didn't slow down. The bike went wide across the center line. An oncoming passenger truck was already close by and couldn't avoid him in time. The collision happened at high speed. He was thrown from the bike on impact. He wasn't wearing a helmet. The rental place had offered one at the counter and he'd turned it down. That detail, honestly, takes me back every time. Not because it changes what happened on that road, but because it was the one call he made before any of it started, before he even turned. The key. He landed hard on the road surface a significant distance from the point of impact. Witnesses stopped. Several went to him. He was unresponsive. Damon Cavello was pronounced dead at a local medical facility shortly after. Cause of death was blunt force trauma from a high-impact collision. He'd been in Phuket for 4 days. His 3 friends were still out on the water when it happened and weren't told until that afternoon. Local authorities documented the rental operation in their report. The case was closed as accidental. He got on a bike he'd never ridden before, and it ended in tragedy within half a mile. It made me think about a hiker in North Carolina who stepped past a clearly posted warning and paid for it on a slick stretch of rock above a waterfall. It was March 8th, 2016, in western North Carolina. The area sits deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, dense forest, steep trail systems, and a handful of waterfall sites that draw hikers from out of state every season. One of those places that looks almost too perfect. Clean air, marked paths at the lower levels, the kind of scenery that makes people feel like nothing bad could possibly happen there. And I think that's part of the problem with this story. Greta Thunberg was 41, a secondary school administrator from Utrecht in the Netherlands. Practical woman, independent, well-traveled, she'd moved through several countries over the years and was comfortable figuring things out on her own. She arrived in the United States in late February 2016 for a solo trip she'd been planning for over a year. She'd done multi-day hikes before, knew how to pack and follow a trail, but had no specific experience with the kind of terrain you find in that part of the Appalachians, where the rock surface near active waterfalls stays permanently wet, where mist from the cascade coats everything within range, and where the difference between solid footing and none at all isn't always visible until you're already committed. On paper, she was the kind of person who should have known better than to take unnecessary risks on an unfamiliar trail. She reached the area in early March and spent her first 2 days on the lower marked trail network without issue. Good boots, proper pack, steady pace. Other hikers who passed her described her as relaxed and well-equipped, nothing flagged, nothing off. And then she found the upper path. The waterfall site had a maintained lower section with a designated viewing area. Most visitors stopped there. But above that point, beyond where the marked trail ended, the terrain changed. Steep, wet rock leading toward the upper cascade. No maintained path, no railing. A posted sign at the transition point warned hikers not to proceed beyond the viewing area due to slippery conditions. It was not subtle. It was directly in her path before the terrain changed. Greta went past it anyway. Here's where it gets hard to defend. She was on an unfamiliar trail, moving through terrain she had never navigated before. And when the footing shifted beneath her, visibly wet, visibly coated in the kind of surface that offers almost no grip, she kept going. No guide, no pause. Didn't turn back when the conditions changed, just kept moving upward. I've covered a lot of these stories, and I'll be honest, that specific moment, the decision to keep going past a sign that was placed there for exactly this reason, is one of the harder ones to explain. Because there was no pressure, no dare, just a woman on a quiet trail who kept walking when she should have stopped. Wet rock near an active waterfall offers very little friction underfoot, especially when coated with mist and runoff. 2 hikers descending from a higher section of the trail were about 40 feet above her when it happened. She lost her footing on a flat section of wet rock near the upper cascade, went down fast, sliding across the rock before going over the edge of a drop of approximately 50 feet before either of them could react. They couldn't reach her from where they were standing. The 2 hikers made their way back down the trail on foot and flagged down other visitors near the lower viewing area. A search party reached her location through the forest access route below the falls. She was found unresponsive at the base of the drop, partially in the shallow runoff pool at the bottom. Greta Thunberg was pronounced dead at a nearby medical facility later that afternoon. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, consistent with a fall from height. Her pack was recovered from the trail above. It contained a travel journal, a camera, and a full set of hiking gear. The 2 hikers who witnessed the fall gave accounts to local authorities, confirming she had moved well past the posted warning before the fall occurred. The case was closed as accidental. Greta's careful planning couldn't protect her from a single deadly misstep. It made me realize how even the most prepared traveler can be undone by one moment of overconfidence, like a man in the Philippines who stepped onto a boat that seemed safe until it wasn't. It was July 22, 2018, in the Visayas region of the Philippines. The islands there run on boats, bangkas, ferries, whatever's available. For locals, it's just how you get around. For tourists, it's charming, it's authentic, it's the kind of thing you post about. And most of the time it's fine. Juno Perez was 28, a freelance graphic designer from Montreal who had been moving through Southeast Asia for about 3 months by the time he got to the Philippines. Easygoing guy, adventurous, the type who figured things out as he went rather than booking everything in advance. He'd been island hopping through the Visayas for 2 weeks and had done plenty of small boat crossings without a problem. And that's the thing. He wasn't new to this. There was a beach gathering on a neighboring island that night, the kind of informal thing that spreads through guest houses by word of mouth. Juno had heard about it earlier that day and had been planning to go since the afternoon. By the time he got to the pier, it was early evening, the light already starting to drop. and there was a small group of tourists gathered at the water's edge, all looking to make the same crossing. The atmosphere was relaxed, people were talking, some had drinks. It had that loose end-of-day energy that places like this tend to carry. At the pier was a small wooden motorboat, privately operated, with no visible registration or safety markings, already loaded with passengers by the time Juno showed up. People crammed inside, others sitting along the outer edges with their legs hanging off. No life vests in sight. The waterline was high, not borderline high, obviously, visibly high. The kind of thing you'd notice walking up to that pier before you'd even decided whether you were getting on. The boat was sitting low, enough in the water that small waves from passing vessels were already lapping close to the hull edge. Several tourists took one look at the boat and chose not to get on, stepping back from the dock. A few of them later said they didn't even discuss it. They just looked at each other and moved away from the dock. Juno got on anyway. I've come across this kind of story before, and every time there's that one moment where you think, okay, what was the version of this that made sense to them? Because it had to make sense somehow, right? The crossing was about 2 miles. The boat pulled away from the pier, with the light already mostly gone. Conditions were moderate. Some wind, a light chop, nothing out of the ordinary for that part of the Philippines at that time of year. Less than 20 minutes in, a passing vessel nearby watched it start to list to one side. The weight shifted unevenly across the hull as the chop picked up, pulling the boat off balance. Water got in fast. It capsized in a short window of time. People went into open water. Some were pulled out by the crew of the passing vessel. Local fishermen reached the scene shortly after and began pulling others out one by one. Not everyone made it. Juno Perez was recovered a short distance from where the boat went down, unresponsive when they pulled him out. He was pronounced dead after being brought to shore. Cause of death was drowning. He was 28 and had been in the Philippines for just under 3 weeks. The boat operator was identified by local authorities and the vessel confirmed unlicensed. The case was closed as an accidental death. His belongings were recovered from the water. His camera was not among them. Juno knew the water, knew the boats, but one misjudgment on a fragile vessel proved deadly. Meanwhile, up in the forests of Costa Rica, a man trusted a harness above the ground in a way that still makes me uneasy. Real quick, if you're finding these stories worth your time, consider subscribing to Fatal Files. No pressure, but it genuinely helps the channel grow and lets me keep putting these together. It was February 11th, 2016, in the Monteverde region of Costa Rica. Monteverde sits in the cloud forest, dense, humid, the kind of place that feels untouched in a way that most tourist destinations don't anymore. Ziplining through it had become one of the most popular activities in the country by that point. The views up there are genuinely something. The problem is that not every operation running cables through those trees is doing it the right way. And in 2016, in that region, the gap between a licensed outfit and an unlicensed one wasn't always obvious to someone who didn't know what to look for. Lev Kettner was 33, a software developer from Portland, Oregon, on a 3-week solo trip through Central America. Researched guy, the type who looked things up before going, read reviews, did his homework. He'd been in Costa Rica for about a week by the time he reached Monteverde and had already done a few outdoor activities without issue. Nothing about his week there suggested someone who cut corners, which makes what happened the morning he showed up to that zipline operation genuinely baffling, because every single red flag was visible before he even put the harness on. He found the operation through a handwritten flyer posted near his guest house. No booking platform, no reviews, no website. Just a flyer and a price that was noticeably cheaper than the licensed outfits running in the area. That alone should have been enough. He showed up anyway. The setup was small, a few cables through the canopy, one operator on site, no safety certifications visible anywhere. The departure platform was a rough wooden construction bolted between 2 trees, uneven underfoot, with no visible reinforcement beyond its main supports. The trolley sitting on the cable had visible signs of wear and corrosion along the wheel housing. And then, the operator handed him the harness. The webbing had visible fraying along multiple points. The stitching on one of the attachment loops had deteriorated to the point where it was physically coming apart. This wasn't wear. You had to look closely to find. It was the kind of deterioration that was obvious the moment the thing was in his hands. He adjusted the harness briefly before clipping it on. And here's where it gets almost hard to believe. The operator's idea of a safety check was a single tug on the main clip before waving Lev toward the platform. No walkthrough, no verbal instructions, no demonstration. Just a tug and a wave. Lev watched all of this happen and got on the platform anyway. The line ran approximately 400 feet between two platforms through the forest canopy, around 50 feet above the ground at its highest point. He clipped in and pushed off, moving steadily across the line. About halfway through, the deteriorated attachment loop failed under the load, causing his only connection to the trolley to detach. Witnesses on the departure platform saw it happen in real time. One moment he was moving along the cable, the next he dropped out of view. He fell directly into the forest floor below, dense root systems, rocks, and uneven ground. He was found unresponsive beneath the line where the failure occurred. The operator raised the alarm, and local emergency responders navigated to the location through the forest access trail. Lev Kettner was pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death was blunt force trauma, consistent with a fall from height. Local authorities shut down the operation immediately, and the operator was detained as part of a negligence investigation. The Zipline was confirmed unlicensed and the equipment deemed wholly unfit for use. The case was ruled an accidental death, with findings pointing to negligence due to unsafe equipment at an unlicensed operation. Lev saw the warning signs and still chose to push forward. A fatal choice in the forest canopy. Watching it unfold made me realize how even experience can't guard against curiosity. Like a photographer in Hawaii who ignored every boundary just to get the perfect shot. It was January 14th, 2017, on the Big Island of Hawaii. Kilauea had been in continuous eruption since 1983, and by early 2017, the lava flow from the East Rift Zone had been reaching the ocean at the Kamokuna entry point along the southern coastline. That site had become something of an attraction, and honestly, it's not hard to see why. The problem was that the area around it was cordoned off for a reason, and that reason was not bureaucratic overcaution. Yael Solvik was 36, a documentary photographer from Amsterdam. She'd spent years building a portfolio around natural phenomena, volcanoes, storm systems, coastal events. She had permits, published work, real experience in difficult environments. I'll give her that. But here's the thing. And this is important. None of that changes what she actually did on the morning of January 14th. Because what she did wasn't a professional judgment call. It wasn't a calculated risk based on experience. It was walking past a clearly marked exclusion zone onto a piece of ground that the USGS had flagged as actively unstable because she wanted a better photo. That's it. Strip away the credentials, and that's the whole story. She'd been on the Big Island for 4 days, shooting the lava flow from approved viewing areas each morning. And look, the approved shots were good. Steam rising off the water, the glow of the flow visible even in daylight. Dramatic sky. Most photographers working that coastline that week were more than satisfied with what the approved areas gave them. Yael wasn't. Each morning she'd been inching closer to the exclusion zone boundary, shooting from as near the rope barriers as she could get. By day 4, that apparently still wasn't close enough, so she crossed. No. The morning of January 14th, she made her way to the Kamokuna entry point before the area was staffed for the day, which, if you think about it, tells you something about how deliberate this was. She didn't accidentally wander past the barriers. She showed up early specifically to avoid the staff who would have stopped her. The exclusion zone was marked with signage and rope barriers. She stepped over them and walked out onto the bench itself. She didn't just step past the barrier and stop. She moved out across the bench surface, past the rope line, past the signage, a meaningful distance from the shore, and set up to shoot. A crew member aboard a Coast Guard patrol vessel operating near the coastline observed her out there, repositioning for different angles, spending several minutes on the bench, which means at no point during any of that did anything prompt her to stop and reconsider. She was focused on the shot. The bench looked flat, dark, walkable from above. It always does. That's the entire reason the exclusion zone existed. Here's what a lava bench actually is, because it matters. It's not solid ground. It's a thin shelf of brittle-cooled basalt suspended over open ocean, formed as successive lava flows cool and solidify over the water. Underneath, it's being weakened constantly. Thermal stress from the active lava flowing below, wave action eroding it from the ocean side. Volcanic monitoring authorities had been observing the Kamakuna bench in the days before January 14th and had flagged it as actively unstable. The exclusion zone had been extended that week specifically because of how the bench was behaving. All of that information was the reason the barriers were where they were that morning. She walked past them anyway. Shortly after the Coast Guard crew members spotted her, a section of the bench gave way beneath her without warning. She went into the water at the active lava entry point, an area generating a continuous plume of laze, a toxic mix of hydrochloric acid gas, steam, and fine glass particles produced when molten lava contacts seawater. Laze can cause rapid respiratory distress at close range. The Coast Guard vessel moved toward the site immediately, but conditions at the entry point made close approach extremely dangerous. Yael Solvik was recovered from the water by the Coast Guard crew after they were able to safely approach the area. She was unresponsive. She was pronounced dead after being brought to shore. Cause of death was confirmed as respiratory failure due to laze exposure, combined with injuries consistent with the bench collapse. She was 36 and had been on the Big Island for 4 days. The case was closed as an accidental death with no evidence of foul play. Her camera equipment was recovered from the bench site. Most of it was destroyed.